Oak Creek welcomed spring as leisurely as anything in this small Oregon town. Meltwater was flowing down the hillsides surrounding the town, and the old oaks that gave it its name were just beginning to turn tender green. Main Street, the main, and in fact, the only significant street in town, was waking up with the sun. Carol's Diner opened first, at 5:30 in the morning. The owner, Carol Baker, a full-figured woman with kind eyes and perpetually disheveled red hair, gathered in a careless bun, was already working the coffee machines. In half an hour, the first visitors would arrive. Logging truck drivers heading for the mountains, a couple or three farmers, and of course the patrol cars of the local sheriff's department. Emily Porter hurried to her morning shift, throwing on a light denim jacket over her uniform dress. The spring air was still chilly, but the girl loved these early hours when the city seemed to belong to her alone. She walked briskly, skipping over puddles in her worn sneakers, her long brown hair fluttering in the wind. In her 18th year, Emily was that rare beauty whose beauty lay not so much in her outward features as in her particular liveliness and sincerity. Big brown eyes looked at the world with curiosity and hope, and a light scattering of freckles on her nose gave her face a special charm. She dreamed of university in Portland, but for now she was saving her money, working at a diner and helping her father with the bookkeeping at his auto shop. James Porter had opened his shop 15 years ago after the local sawmill closed, leaving half the town unemployed. He was a good mechanic and an honest man, which in a small town was valued more than anything else. After his wife died, he raised Emily alone, and the whole town knew how reverently he cared for his only daughter. Sheriff Michael Raines parked his official SUV outside the diner at 6:15 sharp, as he had done every morning for the last 12 years of his service. Tall, with his dark hair streaked with gray eyes, he exuded the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to responsibility. The people of Oak Creek respected their sheriff. He was fair, never took bribes, and had a knack for resolving conflicts without resorting to formal protocols. 3 years ago, Raines lost his wife when she lost control of her car on a mountain road during a heavy rainstorm. Since then, he has lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of the city, fully immersed in work. His office was in the 2-story municipal building, which housed the post office, library, and mayor's office in addition to the police station. It was on that spring morning that the sheriff first noticed the new waitress. He'd seen glimpses of her before. She worked mostly the evening shift, but today Carol had asked her to fill in for Mary, who was sick. "Black coffee and scrambled eggs and bacon?" Emily asked, stopping at his table. Her voice was melodic, with a slight huskiness. Raines looked up from the morning paper and froze for a moment. There was something special about the way the sunlight streaming through the diner's large windows created a seemingly glowing halo around her head. "Yes, thank you. Emily." He read the name on the name tag, and the girl smiled, genuinely, openly. At the neighboring tables sat the usual customers. Bill Henderson, the school bus driver, munching his usual morning donut. The McKinley brothers, owners of the local lumber mill, discussing the latest news from the county. A couple of patrolmen from the night shift finishing up their lingering dinner. Emily brought the order, and their fingers touched for a moment as she set the coffee cup down. That touch felt as if it sent a faint electric shock through them both. Sheriff caught her gaze, something like confusion and interest flashing in her brown eyes at the same time. Since that morning, something had changed in Oak Creek's routine. Raines had started stopping by the diner more often, and Emily had taken on the morning shift more often. Their conversations, which at first consisted of the usual phrases about the weather and orders, grew longer. They discovered a shared love of old westerns and 50s jazz. The sheriff learned of her dream to study literature, and Emily learned of his military background and service in the Marines. The town lived its normal life. The farmers' market was held on Wednesdays, and on Sundays everyone gathered at the local church where Reverend Sullivan spoke about sins and redemption. Joe Miller's barbershop was where the latest news and gossip was discussed, and the Old Oak Bar was where live music lovers gathered in the evenings. A local band played country rock every Friday and Saturday. No one noticed the special looks exchanged between the sheriff and the young waitress. No one saw her linger after her shift to talk to him in his car parked around the corner of the diner. Spring was gaining strength in Oak Creek. and with it grew a feeling that wasn't destined to go unnoticed forever. Their first real meeting was at the town library. Emily often went there after her shifts to read or study. Mrs. Green, the elderly librarian, always kept a hold of the new arrivals of fiction for her. That afternoon, Rains went in to check the security cameras, a routine procedure. He found Emily in the far corner of the reading room, leaning over a tattered volume of Fitzgerald. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows played in her hair, and she seemed so young, so defenseless. "The Great Gatsby?" he asked quietly, taking a seat across from her. She looked up and smiled. "Rereading it. You know, I find something new every time." They talked for almost an hour, about books, about dreams, about life. Emily talked about the mother she barely remembered, who had died of cancer when she was 5. Rains shared stories about his service, how he returned to his hometown and became a deputy sheriff, and then the sheriff himself. After that, they began meeting at the library on a regular basis. It looked innocent to everyone, a respected sheriff helping the daughter of a local mechanic prepare for college. Even Mrs. Green, known for her observant nature, only nodded approvingly when she saw them together. James Porter was busy with his workshop. Spring is a hot time for auto mechanics when everyone is getting their cars ready for the summer season. He trusted his daughter and was glad she had found a good mentor in the sheriff. James himself had never remarried after his wife's death, although Carol Baker had shown a clear interest in him for several years. Everyone in the town was connected to each other by dozens of invisible threads. The deputy sheriff, Tom Riley, was married to Carol's sister. Mayor Harrison played poker with James Porter every Thursday. Reverend Sullivan was Mrs. Green's cousin. This network of connections gave the illusion of security and predictability. The first kiss happened on a chilly evening in late April. Rains was giving Emily a ride home after another library class. They stopped at an observation deck above the city, a common spot for tourists and couples in love, but completely deserted on a weeknight. "You know, this isn't right," he said, looking up at the lights below. "I know," she replied simply, and reached for him first. After that, their meetings became more frequent and secret. Rains had rented a motel room in a neighboring town 40 minutes away. Emily told her father she was taking extra shifts or studying at the library. Everything seemed simple and complicated at the same time. The town, meanwhile, had its own little dramas going on. Mary's son, the same waitress from the diner, was caught stealing from the supermarket. Rains kept the case quiet, limiting it to a serious conversation. In high school, there was a scandal over cheating on final exams. Several sheep went missing from the Johnson farm. Later, it turned out that they had been mauled by a feral dog. Emily was blossoming. Her eyes shone, she laughed a lot, and even began to write poetry. Carol noticed the changes in the girl, but wrote them off as spring and the anticipation of soon entering college. In small towns, however, secrets have a short lifespan. Susan Riley, wife of a deputy sheriff, was the first to suspect something. She noticed the change in Rains's gaze as he looked at the young waitress, how Emily blushed slightly as she took his order. It was still only a vague suspicion, but suspicions had a way of growing and growing. Meanwhile, spring was turning to summer. The days were getting longer, the nights warmer. Oak Creek was preparing for the annual Independence Day Festival, the main event of the year in the town's life. No one could have predicted that these festive days would be the beginning of the end. It had been a hot summer in Oak Creek. The asphalt was melting in the midday sun, and the air conditioner at Carol's Diner was working at maximum capacity. In the evenings, the townspeople gathered by the lake, a small body of water a mile from the center, where the coolness and shade of old oak trees brought welcome relief. The July festival was business as usual, with a parade of fire trucks, an apple pie contest, and fireworks over the lake. Sheriff Rains kept order, habitually serious in his uniform, while Emily helped Carol with the mobile coffee stand. They'd barely exchanged a word all day, but their looks said more than words could. Their relationship had grown into more than just a physical attraction. In the rare hours they could be together, they talked about books, music, life. Rains told her stories from his service in the Marines, about the countries he had traveled to. Emily shared her dreams of a writing career, read him her first stories. They met at the Pine Grove Motel in a neighboring town where no one knew them. Occasionally, they would go out to the remote forest roads, where Rains would teach Emily to drive his personal Ford. Each meeting required careful planning, each moment together stolen from time and circumstance. In the town, meanwhile, life went on as usual. James Porter, Emily's father, was expanding his shop, buying new diagnostic equipment, and hiring a young mechanic, Steve Collins. The boy had recently returned from the army and was looking for work. He often stopped by the diner and always sat at the counter where Emily worked. "How about we go to a movie on Saturday?" Steve asked. "There's a new multiplex opening in Redwood." Emily politely declined, citing college preparations. Her father sighed. Steve seemed like the perfect match for his daughter. But Emily had other plans. She received a letter of provisional admission to the University of Portland. The full scholarship she dreamed of was almost in her pocket. All that was left was to take the final tests in August. "I could get a job in Portland," she told Rains during one of their meetings. "We could see each other more often. It's only a 3-hour drive." Rains was silent, staring out the window of the motel room. He knew he should let her go, let her build her life without him. But the thought of parting hurt almost physically. Susan Riley, meanwhile, had begun her little investigation. She noticed that the sheriff's squad car would sometimes disappear for hours at a time for no apparent reason. That Emily had started taking more frequent days off on unusual days. That they both seemed to glow from within with some secret light. One evening, she shared her suspicions with her husband. Tom Riley listened to his wife and frowned. If word got out to the city council, it could cost Rains his position. And Tom had been not only a deputy sheriff, but his friend since high school. In mid-August, an unusual heat wave came to town. The temperature rose above 100 degrees during the day and barely dipped to 80 at night. People became irritable. Small accidents became more frequent. Fights broke out at the Old Oak Bar almost every night. Emily felt that her relationship with Rains was approaching a tipping point. She could no longer be content with infrequent meetings and secret glances. University seemed like a ticket to a new life. Their life together. "We could leave," she had once said. "Start over somewhere where no one knows us." Rains shook his head. "You should go to university, get an education, live your life." "What about our life?" To that question, he had no answer. During the last week of August, strange things began to happen in town. Someone broke a window in the sheriff's office. An anonymous letter was planted in the porter's mailbox. Tom Riley noticed that the sheriff's house was being watched. Someone's car regularly appeared on the neighboring street. Emily was preparing to leave for Portland. She packed books, clothes, her journals. James Porter was proud of his daughter, but he was troubled by some shadow in her eyes, some reticence in their conversations. Clouds were gathering over the town, both literally and figuratively. The weather forecasters were promising a severe thunderstorm. No one knew that this storm would bring not only rain, but a tragedy that would change Oak Creek's life forever. September came to Oak Creek with early frosts and misty dawns. Emily was supposed to leave for Portland in 2 weeks, but something kept her in town. She'd taken a semester off, telling her father she wanted to save up for a life in the big city. James Porter didn't argue, although deep down he felt that his daughter was not telling him something. The first alarm bell rang at the beginning of the month. Susan Riley, the wife of a deputy sheriff, came into the auto shop as if for a routine checkup. "You know, James," she said as she watched the mechanic check the oil, "you might want to keep an eye on your girl. It's a small town. Word travels fast." James straightened up, wiping his hands with a rag. "What are you talking about, Susan? About how some people need to be mindful of their position and age." That same evening, a hard conversation took place at the Porter house. Emily denied everything, but her eyes glistened with held-back tears. James raised his voice at his daughter for the first time in his life. Rains noticed a change in his deputy's demeanor. Tom Riley had become more formal, his reports becoming more detailed, especially as they related to the movement of department vehicles. On the wall in the sheriff's office appeared a map marking patrol routes. Anonymous letters began arriving regularly, both at the sheriff's office and at the Porter home. There were no direct accusations, only innuendos and clippings of newspaper articles about official misconduct. Rains burned them without reading them. Emily hid hers in an old shoebox. At the Old Oak Bar, the whispers grew louder and louder. Steve Collins, a young mechanic, had had a few too many drinks and was ranting about old perverts who can't keep their hands to themselves. The fight was short. The sheriff has never been known for his patience with drunken antics. Carol Baker noticed that her best waitress had lost weight and was slimmed down. She tried to talk to Emily, but she only waved her off. "It's okay, I just don't get enough sleep." On one of their last meetings at the Pine Grove Motel, Emily cried, "I can't take it anymore, let's just go away, anywhere." Raines hugged her, knowing it was impossible. His life, his job, his responsibility to the city, all of it couldn't just be left behind, and her life was just beginning. In mid-September, a letter arrived at the mayor's office with photos. They showed the sheriff and Emily leaving the motel. The pictures were fuzzy but recognizable. Mayor Harrison summoned Raines for a confidential conversation. "Mike, you do realize this is the end of your career, right? Maybe even jail." "She's 18, Harry. It's all legal." "Legal? You're the law in this town. Was you?" Raines sat in his office for a long time that night, looking at his sheriff's badge, 20 years of service, the respect of the townspeople. It was all crumbling like a house of cards. Emily waited for him by the lake, their usual meeting place. She already knew about the photos news in a small town spreads faster than wildfire. In her backpack were bus tickets to Portland for two. The last week of September had been unusually cold. A thick fog drifted over the lake in the mornings, turning familiar shapes into blurred shadows. Tom Riley was on duty Friday night when a dispatcher reported shots fired in the lake area. The body was found at dawn. It lay at the water's edge, partially submerged in the cold waters of the lake. 2 bus tickets to Portland, soaked with morning dew, lay nearby. Tom Riley was the first to arrive on the scene. He took a long look at the body before calling forensics from the state capitol. The case was too big for the small-town police. That same day, Detective Sarah Holt of the Homicide Squad arrived in Oak Creek. As she entered the police station, the huge oak tree in front of the building was dropping its last leaves. Sarah Holt arrived in Oak Creek, accompanied by 2 CSIs from the state capitol. A tall brunette with sharp dark eyes and a tough temper, she specialized in small-town murders, the kind of cases where everyone knows everyone and everyone is connected by dozens of connections. The body was immediately identified as Emily Porter, age 18. Cause of death was a gunshot wound to the chest at close range. Time of death between 9 o'clock and 11 p.m. There were no signs of a struggle. 2 spent shell casings of .38 caliber were found on the ground. "Where's Sheriff Raines?" Holt's first question caught Tom Riley off guard. "Can't reach him. He's not at home." Raines's squad car turned up in a lakeside parking lot, half a mile from the crime scene. No sign of a struggle inside, just a forgotten holster on the passenger seat. His service weapon, a .38 caliber revolver, was missing. James Porter was the first to be questioned. He sat in the police station interview room, hunched over, his face blackened with grief. "When did you last see your daughter?" "Yesterday morning. She said she was on her way to work." "Did you know about her relationship with Sheriff Raines?" A long pause. "Found out a few weeks ago. We had a fight." Carol Baker confirmed that Emily had worked the 8 p.m. shift. She was kind of jumpy, spilled coffee twice, never had that before. A diary was found in Emily's purse. The last entry was dated the day of the murder. "Everything will change today. We will be free." Sarah Holt methodically interviewed the townspeople. The story emerged gradually. A secret affair, anonymous letters, threats of exposure. Tom Riley was reluctant to talk about the photos that had gotten to the mayor. "The sheriff would never hurt her," he insisted. "Mike loved that girl." But all the evidence pointed to Raines. His gun, the murder weapon, his car near the crime scene. Motive: fear of exposure, loss of career, possible prosecution. On the 3rd day of the investigation, a new detail emerged. A surveillance camera at a gas station 50 miles outside of town captured Raines buying gas around midnight on the day of the murder. He looked calm, paid in cash, and drove off in the direction of the coast. "Should we put out an APB on him?" Riley asked. Holt shook her head. "Not yet. Something doesn't add up here." She went over the case file again and again. Something was eluding her attention. some detail that could turn everything upside down. On the fourth day of the investigation, Sarah Holt returned to the crime scene. Something in the arrangement of the evidence kept her on her toes. She was walking along the shore of the lake, trying to reconstruct the events of that night, when one of the forensic investigators called out to her. "Detective, we found something." A metal object, an army badge on a torn chain, glinted in the mussed grass. It was half stomped into the dirt, as if someone had stepped on it in a struggle. "Stephen J. Collins," Holt read. "Tom, does that name look familiar to me?" "Mechanic at Porter's shop," Riley replied. "Came back from the army a few months ago." Reviewing the surveillance tapes of the surrounding businesses took all afternoon. One of them, from the McKinley Brothers sawmill, showed Collins' blue pickup truck parked near the lake an hour before the murder. Holt paid a visit to the workshop. James Porter had practically lived there the last few days, immersed in his work, trying to drown out his grief. "How long have you known Steve Collins?" "About 5 months. Good mechanic. Quiet guy." "Did he show any interest in your daughter?" Porter hesitated. Asked her out a couple times, but she turned him down. Steve seemed to take it okay. That same evening, a team with a search warrant entered Collins's rented house on the outskirts of town. What they found there turned the entire investigation upside down. One bedroom wall was hung with photos of Emily, at work, at the lake, entering the library. Some had been taken through the window of her room. In a desk drawer, they found drafts of anonymous letters and newspaper clippings about her. But the biggest clue was waiting for them in the garage. In a toolbox, they found ammunition, the same brand used by the county police. Ballistics testing confirmed the bullets used to shoot Emily were from that batch. "He stole them when he was servicing police cars," Riley guessed. "Hell, he planned the whole thing." Holt studied the documents on Collins' desk. Among them were medical reports from military psychiatrists, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, a tendency to stalk. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Hasn't shown up at the workshop in 2 days," Riley replied. "Phone's been disconnected." The phone call at the station came closer to evening. Rain's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, broken, as if the man had been silent or screaming for a long time. "I'm at the Pine Grove Motel, number 12, the very same room. Come on over." Holt and Riley found him in a semi-dark room. The sheriff was sitting on the edge of an unmade bed, hunched over as if under the weight of an invisible weight. 3-day stubble, crumpled clothes, reddened eyes. He had aged 10 years in those days. An untouched bottle of whiskey stood on the table. "She made an appointment to meet at midnight," he began, staring at one point. "Bought bus tickets. We were going to go to Portland, start a new life. I was supposed to sell the house, get a job. We had a plan." His voice shook. Riley, who'd known Rains for 20 years, had never seen him so broken. "Why did you go into hiding?" Holt's voice was calm, professional. Rains raised his inflamed eyes to her. "When I got to the lake, it was past midnight. I saw her car, went to our place, thought she was waiting for me, and then I saw her there by the water. At first I thought she was asleep. I came closer." He fell silent, clenching his fists. "I just broke down. I couldn't believe it. Thought I was dreaming, that it was a nightmare. Got in the car and drove off. I don't remember where I went. I woke up at a gas station, and then I just drove until I ran out of gas." His service revolver was on the table. Holt checked the drum, all 6 rounds in place, not a single shot. Later, the expert examination will confirm this weapon had not been fired for at least a week. Reconstruct the events of that fateful night helped surveillance cameras and witness statements. Emily arrived at the lake around 9 p.m. A young waitress from the bar saw her walking along the shore, clearly immersed in her thoughts. In her backpack, she had stacked 2 bus tickets and a small amount of cash, all she had managed to save. Collins met her there. He knew about her plans. He'd been following her for weeks, tapping her phone calls with a device purchased over the internet. Footage from gas station and convenience store cameras showed his blue pickup truck had been circling the lake neighborhood since 7 p.m. that night. A search of his home turned up a diary, dozens of pages written in scrawled handwriting. Obsessive thoughts, plans, fantasies. The last entry was dated the day of the murder. She should have been mine. I saved her from disgrace. Now she will forever be pure, beautiful, like an angel. Collins was picked up on the third day at the Coastal Ocean Wave Motel. He sat in his room looking at the sunset and didn't even try to resist. When questioned, he spoke calmly, almost detachedly, as if he were telling someone else's story. I loved her for real. His eyes glittered feverishly. Not like he did, dirty, vicious. I was her equal. We could have started a family, had children, and she chose him, an old man old enough to be her father. Collins confessed to everything. The anonymous letters, the surveillance, the theft of police ammunition from the workshop. He wanted to ruin the sheriff's reputation, to make Emily see him as a monster. When that didn't work, he decided the only way to save her was death. You should have seen her face when she realized who I really was. There was a strange satisfaction in his voice. So pure, so surprised. She was beautiful in that moment. The trial lasted only 3 days. The jury had 40 minutes to reach a verdict. 25 years without parole, the maximum under state law. Raines resigned the day after the trial. He sold the house, leaving only a box of Emily's photos and letters. He was last seen at the cemetery. A tall figure in a black coat stood at a fresh grave, placing a bouquet of white roses. Then he got into his car and drove away without looking back. They say he settled somewhere on the coast in a small fishing village. James Porter could not live in a city where every corner reminded him of his daughter. He sold the workshop to a young family from Portland and left to join his sister in Idaho. Before he left, he stopped by the diner to say goodbye to Carol. She cried as she hugged an old friend and then hung a picture of Emily over the counter, a brightly colored shot of a young girl laughing, looking somewhere outside the frame. Oak Creek was slowly getting back to normal. A new sheriff, Tom Riley was the new sheriff, patrolled the streets. The diner was still packed with regulars, and church bells rang on Sundays. But something had changed in the town forever. On the shore of the lake, where Emily's body was found, the locals planted a young oak tree. Every spring it is covered with fresh foliage, and when the wind rustles its crown, the old-timers say they hear the whispers of two lovers whose story was cut short too soon. Fresh flowers always lie at the foot of the oak tree. No one knows who brings them,